Hello everybody, my name is Ratnos, and I'm here reviewing my Mythic Plus predictions for which specs were going to be good this season. This was aimed at like high keys, so not like MDI level keys, but just high keys on the live servers. And yeah, let's get into it. So let's start off by talking about tanks. How did I rate the tanks? I had Guardian, Vengeance, Prot Warrior, Blood's Death Knight, all up at the top, and I put Brew and Prot Pally right near the top of B. Let's take a look at the top tanks right now on the live servers. So actually, what we have is one of the most diverse tank metas to ever exist. And yeah, we actually have, so we have Vengeance at the top, followed by Blood, followed by Bear, followed by Brew. There's only one warrior in the top 20, so that's the least represented spec. And otherwise, every other spec has multiple representatives on this list. Every single spec represented in the top 10. So if anything, the only thing that I don't like about my list here, like, probably should have put... I actually, you know what? All the tanks are just so close that if anything, the only issue is that maybe there's just not a full tier between them. Or maybe just this should have been like A- and this should have been B+ for tanks, something like that. But overall, I mean, extremely close tank balance. If you actually listen to this video, you'll hear me basically say I think the tanks are all going to be very close and they're all going to be very good. And I'm pretty happy about landing there. I do think that is the case. I think tanks are all around fantastic. Tank balance is out of this world, phenomenally good. If you looked at MDI, you would see a similar story. In MDI, we've seen 5 out of 6 tank specs represented, with Blood DK being the only absent one. And yeah, again, phenomenal there. All right, let's move on to healers. So looking at healers, here is a look at the top of the healing situation. You can see quite a lot of pink. That is the Holy Paladin color, of course, and I have Holy Paladin in the S tier. Didn't take a genius to predict this one, but whenever they only nerfed Dash and Hallow by like 15%, you could tell that Holy Paladin was going to be dominant for another tier, and indeed they are. Holy Paladin's extremely good in both live keys and actually in the MDI. Once again, in the MDI, we actually saw 5 total healer specs represented across the last 3 group play weekends, but it's been like 95% Holy Paladins and just one-off representations of the other few. And similarly on the live side, things are pretty lopsided as well. So unlike the... Actually, yeah, I'm pretty happy with this, right? I have Resto Shaman in A. Maybe the only thing I should do is shift all the ones that aren't Holy Paladin just one further down, to not because the other ones are bad, but just to further emphasize that gap with Holy Paladin just providing so much damage at the very top of the situation. Okay, let's move on to talking about damage dealers. So let's start off with Rogue, because I see Rogue up at the top there, and I can pull up the Rogue leaderboards. So let me see if I can go find spec-based leaderboards. Okay, I can do that. So I had Outlaw up in S tier, and we can take a look. So here is the top assassination rogues. They are at 2.7, 2.8 IO. Top outlaw rogues, we have up at several up in the 2.8 range, and we're our top sub rogues. And our top sub rogues are even higher, even more of them up there. So I think I was a little bit I overshot here on outlaw. I think it's pretty clear that subtlety is as good or better than outlaw is this tier, and I have sub down in C. Very big miss on that one for me. Sub should have been, so realistically probably neither of these should have been S, or sub should have been S. Outlaw definitely A would have been fine for it, but yeah, I missed on how much damage sub was going to do. I missed it as well for raid. I had it a little bit underrated, although I got bailed out by assassination being better on Sylvanas than sub was. And then assassination assassination you could see was really not far behind on those scores either. B probably a reasonable place for it though. Okay, what's the next DPS spec I ranked? So below Outlaw, the next DPS spec we can find is Balanced Druid. Balanced Druids are absolutely showing up very high here on the score. You can see we got one of them at 29.11, and then just a bunch in the 28 range. So this is way more than we see of rogues even at this level of score. And Balanced Druid definitely doing really well on high keys on the live servers as Venthyr. They are just bringing so much damage for the important pulls of the dungeon. So that is probably a spec that could justify an S ranking. Certainly if I was going to put Subtlety in S, Balance should go in S as well. Maybe you could make an argument they should both be in A, because none of them really represent as much dominance as, say, Holy Paladin is bringing. But extremely good. You saw Kyrian Moonkin a little bit in the MDI. That's more of an MDI phenomenon, built around a little bit shorter of a cooldown, built around just not having as effective ramps as you do on the live servers, because stuff is dying too fast to get really a full value ramp in. But definitely a great spec all around. And the value of stuff like trees and Innervate and Solar Beam, all those sorts of things, they just makes things possible that otherwise wouldn't be. All right, up next is Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest, you can see about 100 points lower on average, these top Shadow Priests than the top Moonkins. Certainly some of them are doing quite well and doing very high keys. But yeah, I mean, this could be a low A or a high B spec. It's definitely doing damage. It's out there, having a good time. Does make a couple of dungeons in particular a lot easier. Mass Dispel actually a pretty potent piece of value this season. I'm recording this right at the start of Bursting Storming Week, but they are very good for bursting as well. So yeah, good spec, doing good things. Let's talk about Mage. So I have both Frost and Fire up in the top of the charts here, taking a look at the different Mage specs, how they're doing IO-wise right now at the top of the leaderboards. We can see this is Frost. Frost, we have somebody up at 28 and then a bunch of people at 27. And similarly, Fire, we have a bunch of people up at 28, so Fire actually doing a little bit better than Frost if you look just at the raw numbers. And then where do we have Arcanes? And Arcane Mage also, several candidates up here in the above 28 range. Let's take a look at the synthesis of this as well. Just people, because sometimes there are people that are actually swapping around entirely between these. And so yeah, if you look at this, you can see mages that are comfortable playing multiple specs are even higher on score, swapping between these based on the dungeon, which I think just goes to show, yeah, all the mage specs are fantastic right now. They all have their own niche. If anything, Arcane should probably be up in A as well, with Frost and Fire, and maybe Fire should be slightly higher than Frost, but yeah, mage specs, all great. Things will probably... Right now, you can't swap Covenants, and there is some Covenant tension between these different mage specs. You can play Night Fae and Mythic Plus as all three of them, but once people have access to actually swapping to Kyrian and Venthyr as they feel they want on certain weeks and certain dungeons, I think you will see even more those mages that can play all three getting a little bit more of an edge, finding cool spots to play other mage specs. Okay, Shaman. Ellie Shaman. So I have Ellie Shaman up in A, and here's a quick look at the top Ellie Shamans. You can see we indeed have many Ellie Shaman putting up that over 2,800 score. Again, this is being recorded right at the start of Push Week, so I expect a lot of these scores will be increased dramatically if you check these for yourself, say 5 or 6 days, or even when this video comes out. I might record, this video might come out a couple days after I record it, not quite sure yet, so you may see some change there, but you can see, yeah, Ellie Shaman definitely doing well, putting up numbers. I think does show that it's being competitive up at the top end there. I'm pretty happy with where I placed it. Let's take a look at Enhancement right now as well, since we're talking about DPS Shamans. And you can see, if we change this over to Enhancement, something went wrong. And hold. Okay, here, and we can see, so you can see definitely, like, this is what it looks like when there's a little bit of a different story. Got El Broiblo here, who actually for many seasons has been putting up incredible results on Enhancement. Even, I think, played it in an MDI, if I'm not mistaken, once. And is at the top of the leaderboards, no surprise on that spec, and then a bunch of people who are sub 2,700. So Enhancement, where did I end up putting it? I put it in the middle of B. Potentially, this could even be a C, but you can see, so you can see the scores are fairly close here. It is worth noting that compared to previous seasons, 100 points is a lot more than it used to be. You know, it used to be that the difference between 2,700 and 2,800 last season was like 3 keys, and this season that's actually like 10 keys, because the score just jumps are so smaller, and they increase linearly rather than exponentially as the key level goes up, which does mean that if you're used to, like if you watch this sort of video in previous seasons, you kind of have to recalibrate a little bit. the gap between 2700 and 2900 is massive, for instance, whereas it didn't used to be. That used to be like 1 key level. Now that's like 3 key levels. Okay, so let's see. What spec next? Windwalker. Windwalker I put up at the top of B. This is probably going to be one where I'm going to wish I had it higher. Yeah. All right, so here's Windwalker. We got a 2900 gamer. Again, you can see this is 26s and 27s, whereas the 2700 score had like a 23 in it. And then just so many 28s, 2800s. Yeah, this should have been an A tier spec for sure. The spec is demolishing the meters wherever it is being played. People are doing so much damage on it, and it is just so well suited for Mythic Plus. You can see Necrolord, currently the Covenant of choice here. Of course, we don't see the Covenants from the Chinese regions, but we can assume that probably is Necrolord as well. And yeah, I mean, just so much AoE damage, very valuable. Should certainly be an A. I don't think any DPS probably should be an S. We can actually take a look. One way to try kind of figure out, at least if in my mind something deserves to be an S, is just if you take a look at like the timed run leaderboards. Is there a spec that you see in all or almost all of these top runs, right? So for instance, tanks, pretty clearly nothing here is like S in terms of all the top runs are using it. Healers, okay, there's a lot of pink, right? There's one person playing Resto Shaman, but then all of the other people in the top 20 timed runs are playing Holy Paladin. That's a pretty good indicator that S is deserved. And then if you look at the mages, right? Even though there's a lot of blue here, it's actually all 3 different mage specs. And there's not really, like, there are groups without a rogue, there's groups without a moonkin, there's groups without a havoc, there's groups without a windwalker, and there's multiple of them. So I think that does indicate that probably there don't need to be any specs that are DPS specs that should be an S tier. But healer wise, yeah, this is an S tier sort of performance from Holy Paladin. Okay, what are we on to next? Let's talk about Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc Demon Hunter, also I think a spec that might be a little bit underrated right now. You can see we got somebody pushing that 2900, probably will be by the time this video comes out. A couple people at 28, and actually not as many people at 28 as a lot of the other specs. So by pure statistics, probably B is a fine place for this to be, or low A. I do think the spec's really good, though. I think this is a spec that maybe being slept on a little bit. It provides a lot of value to a lot of groups. So, yeah, we'll see. It is kind of tough to play it as momentum in a lot of dungeons, though. So maybe that's part of what's going on there. Okay, I talked about Assassination. We've talked about Arcane. I have Fury at the top of the Warriors here, and then I have Arms also in this tier. The way I usually do this is like usually this one is the top of a tier and this is the bottom of a tier, and it's not like a huge difference, but sometimes I'm making that distinction. I'm a little inconsistent when I make these videos by like how much there's a difference between the top of a tier and the bottom of a tier versus how much just everything is not sorted as much within the same tier. But certainly Arms is going to be the spec that has higher scores than Fury. So here is Arms. We've got 2 players at 28, a bunch of players at 27, and here is Fury. We got a Fury gamer also at 28 and a bunch of players at 27. So, you know what? I'm dumb and wrong. There's people owning on Fury that I had not seen as many of these runs before, but that's cool to see. Let's take a look at the class leaderboards for Warrior again and just see if there's people who are playing Warrior as DPS. Man, I need to extend this down so I can actually get this. Who are playing both specs on Warrior, right? That's always an interesting thing to look at. Yeah, you can see, so people aren't actually playing both specs, right? These are the same scores we saw from the other runs, and it's mostly people playing one spec of Warrior. Kyrian starting to make its way up on the Warrior leaderboards as well. I suspect that a lot of Mythic Plus runs will be being done as Kyrian once Covenant swaps are free for Arms Warriors. That spec does a lot of AoE damage. Yeah, fairly happy with this. I'd probably put Arms up here equal with Fury. All right, let's talk about Survival Hunter. So Survival Hunter, actually, one of the 25 specs to see play in the MDI, the 3 MDI group weekends. 25 of the 36 specs have seen play, and one of them was indeed Survival Hunter. Actually, 2 different Survival Hunters saw play. And actually, here's a look at... Oh, this is just Hunter. Man, I baited myself. Here's a look at Survival. So you can see we got a couple of people at 27, a bunch of people at 26. Really not bad, right? People doing 26s on Survival. I guess one person did 126 on Survival. A lot of people doing 25s on Survival, though. Okay, 3 people doing 25s in survival. So yeah, it's definitely not an A level spec. Probably the bottom of B would be more appropriate for this. But still, survival ends, does a lot of damage, does a lot of AoE. Very cool spec. All right, let's talk about Warlocks. So here's another miss. Here's another miss of mine, was putting Affliction down in C while putting Demonology and Destruction up in B. If we take a look at some of the spec-specific stuff, here's our top Affliction lock. Shelly playing Affliction at 2800. Demonology, we have Shelly in second at 2500. And Destruction, we have 2700. So to me, this paints a picture of Affliction as like bottom of A or top of B, Destruction B, and probably Demonology down in C would have actually made sense with this. Let's take a look at the class leaderboards for Warlock as well, and you can see that there are again some people gaining some score on multiple specs, although this is pretty similar to just the Affliction top end list. Yeah, you can see Shelly actually has some score coming from not Affliction, but only like 7 points coming from another spec. So definitely Affliction Warlock is a spec that I missed. That spec is doing absurd amounts of AoE damage right now with the Night Fae Legendary, the Decaying Soul Satchel, and then just smashing their face on the Seed of Corruption button. And that is doing so much damage that is making the spec just absolutely worth bringing, especially in dungeons where the bosses, like on Fortified Week, dungeons where the bosses aren't as important, dungeons where you can pull trash onto bosses, or where bosses have ads. Affliction is just demolishing in those circumstances, and I have some designs on potentially playing some Affliction this season. I kind of want to learn Demonology as well, but man, Demonology looks hard, but we'll see. We'll see if any of that content comes out here. Ever since they announced the 9.1.5 Covenant swapping stuff, I've started thinking about like gearing a lot of characters and trying to play a lot of stuff as soon as all that gets live, because it's really made me excited to play the game again instead of being, shackled to a Covenant for raid that I don't want to play in M+. Although Warlock doesn't have that problem. Warlock is vibing out playing Night Fae in all cases. All right, Retribution Paladin is the next spec on the list there. You can see that's where I paused the video with my cursor over. And we have Rep Pally, 1 at 27, a bunch at 26, kind of doing their thing. Seems like a reasonable type of score to put in B. Definitely not one that a lot of the top groups are using, but a spec that can absolutely hold its own and, earn its spot by being played well. One of the specs I think we didn't see in the MDI so far, but, definitely not bad. Marksmanship, if you look at scores, definitely doing quite a bit better here. We have Marksmanship, we got a couple people at 28, and then a bunch of people at 27. So this probably should have been up in A. Marksmanship's definitely not a bad spec, a bad choice right now, particularly Marksmanship Hunters with the bow, the Sylvanas bow, get an AoE silence, which is actually pretty sweet in Mythic Plus, the Wailing Arrow ability. It's something that does bring quite a bit of utility, so something to consider, although of course, you can't just get the bow forehead, right? Is a spec that does suffer from a little bit of squishiness as you start reaching highest levels of Mythic Plus. If you're fighting something like Incinerator Arcoleth, the person your healer is always clenched the most about is going to be your hunter, because they just lack like passive self-healing, passive damage reduction effects on themselves, short cooldown defensives. They're sitting there with like Aspect of the Turtle, and then after that is like, I got Exil and I got a 20% shield wall on a 3-minute cooldown. You're going to have to heal me. Okay, DPS Death Knights. Let's take a look at... I pulled up Frost here first. We got a Frost Gamer at 2700, a couple at 26, and then a lot at 25. So this is kind of low B or high C numbers out of Frost. Unholy, very similar story here. In fact, you could hardly tell. If you were watching the scores, you could hardly tell when I swap between these. Very similar scores from the two specs, which only a genius would put two specs with such similar scores directly next to each other in their tier list. That would be pure brilliance. And if we look at just Death Knights overall, you can see, people mostly sticking with one spec in Mythic Plus. Nobody who's gained a lot of score by adding the two specs together. So it's not both of them are doing fine. Not in particularly popular spot. Of these specs, we did see Unholy in the MDI a little bit, but very rarely. We didn't see Frost. Of the different classes, I think Death Knight might actually be the one that saw the least play in the MDI total. Okay, I forgot to talk about Beastmaster when we were talking about Hunters before. I guess some of these classes I've been doing by class, and some I've been doing by spec, to follow my usual organizational structure of LoL. So let's see what we've got for Beast Mastery. Beast Mastery, we got some people at the 27, very high 27, almost 28, heartbreakingly close to 28. And you can see that's actually pretty close to the Marksman. So definitely, you know, a cut behind Marksmanship in terms of the numbers they've been putting up so far, but not a huge cut. Definitely close. And, you know, it's nice to be more mobile in Mythic Plus as well. Although Marksmanship, really not that bad in most dungeons this expansion. You don't really feel like you need to be playing Beast Mastery to do certain boss encounters or anything like that, although it is nice, especially when you have Oros active on the last boss, to just be able to keep moving freely, or when you're fighting Oros itself, if you're ever doing that, which most players in most high keys generally don't. Generally you see Oros with the last boss in these kind of bleeding edge runs. Okay, so yeah, actually fairly happy with where I have Beast Mastery here, at least relative to Marksmanship. Again, Marksmanship could probably go up half a tier or a tier, and Beast Mastery could follow somewhat. And what does that leave us with? That leaves us with, we've already covered these. These were two big misses. Two of the three that I put down in C actually should have been much higher. They should have been an A. So this is by far the weakest part of my tier list, was my predictions on these things. And then let's talk about Feral Druid. Feral Druid, doing reasonably well, 26, a couple 26s. This is higher than some specs like Demonology, but really only Demonology. Yeah, probably this one probably could have stayed in C, assuming you brought specs like Demonology down into C. It could have been a pretty reasonable thing to do for the spec. Feral does a tremendous amount of single target damage. I have played some Feral keys this season, and it just shreds. It shreds on single target. Doesn't shred in AoE though, and that's not just because it's... Actually, it does sometimes, but it doesn't actually shred in terms of doing a lot of damage in AoE. And the uncapping of other specs is going to help it even less, because one of its strengths was actually that it had some uncappedness to its damage. But yeah, just, I don't know, they need to make this spec do some AoE damage. They need to consider the fact that Boomkin just has like Solar Beam and trees and Innervate, and Feral is just sitting there like, I got nothing. You know, if you look at the start of this expansion, they took Roar away from being like a Feral exclusive, and they gave it to Moonkin as well, and nothing went in the other direction. So this is something that Feral does need some assistance with as soon as possible. You'll see the top Feral Druids all playing Night Fae. This is a pretty cool build. You play the Night Fae 1 minute Convoke build. That's actually, it's very fun. It's a very fun spec. I've enjoyed keys a lot on Feral, but definitely you can see how it's just not bringing as much as these other specs are to the table. Okay, so all in all, reasonably happy with how this tier list went. There are these two glaring disasters down here in the C tier that are very, very bad mistakes on my end, but mostly clumping everything fairly closely together. I'm pretty happy about doing. Very happy with how I rated the tanks, very happy with how I rated the healers, and pretty happy with most of my calls here. Before the season came out, calling that Fire Mage wasn't dead was actually pretty controversial. And of course it's not dead. And yeah, these DPS specs, I probably could have known better. I probably could have known Windwalker should have gone up by 1. Yeah, I think most of the other logic here worked out reasonably well. Again, with just these two horrific exceptions at the bottom of the list. So there's my predictions. Hope you enjoyed this little look back at this old video. I will do this again for next season. I think it's always valuable whenever people are trying to, make predictions, to actually put your money where your mouth is and make the predictions before stuff comes out, rather than just saying, oh, you knew about this all along after the fact, which some people do. But yeah, that's my video. Hope you enjoyed. See you in the next one. Bye.